Hello everyone, welcome again to another EUROCONTROL Aviation StraightTalk Live. Great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. I'm Andrew Charlton, and today we're looking at the situation for airports and looking for the situation at airports globally. We are interviewing Luis Felipe de Oliveira, who is the new DG of ACI World, the global organisation for airports, Airport Council International, and he managed to take up his new job right in the middle of the pandemic, so he's never known what it's like to be a normal airport at a normal time. But in the meantime, he's having to learn or to experience what it's like to be in charge of an organisation at a time when it is absolutely abnormal. To find out how normal it's becoming, how abnormal it still is, I'd like to ask the Director General of EUROCONTROL, as he always does at this time, to give us a quick update on the state of the market. Eamonn, if you'd be so kind.
Good afternoon from Brussels and welcome to another Straight Talk. Today we feature the Director General of ACI World, Luis Felipe de Oliveira, and Andrew Charlton, and I'm looking forward to a really good interview. I just want to mention that most of the Straight Talks are now available on podcasts. So if you want to see world leaders ranging from Alan Joyce to the CEO of Airbus, the CEO of British Airways, they're all available on podcasts, and they can be a real good resource for universities, but also for researchers and for the industry. So first of all, it's important to talk to you today about what's happening in Europe at the moment. So the good news is traffic is trending upwards. And what's really interesting to see is that over the last week or so, that we've had a significant increase in traffic. Look at the levels, plus 22% over the last 2 weeks ago. So we're seeing a real benefit of the vaccine rollout, how everything is actually going, and it's looking really well. So I'm really pleased with this. Also, it's worth looking at who's operating. You know, yesterday we had a really very exciting day in the network on the 1st of June. Ryanair reintroduced nearly 700 flights into their schedule yesterday, and this had an immediate effect of driving them to number one in the network. But all throughout, you see EasyJet have stepped back in again, also Vueling have stepped back in again, and the whole thing is going very, very well. So it's really positive from an airline point of view. Also, the vaccines. The rollout of the vaccines is central to the success, and this is worldwide. Here, if you look, for instance, you can see really good progress in the UK. But what I really want to focus on is the long haul. And here it's going to be more difficult. We're having less success with full vaccinations in Canada, Singapore, and if you look at places like Australia, Japan, Korea, Asia, it's going to be difficult to get long haul travel moving again, particularly to Asia Pacific. I'm much more optimistic for the North Atlantic, which I think will start moving again during the summer. Also, it's worth looking at our traffic scenarios. We published on the 28th of January our last set of traffic scenarios, and they were absolutely 100% accurate, which is amazing. So we're looking at now the summer, looking at the blue line that you can see there. And what's really interesting is we believe that actually we might get above the blue line for the summer and cut somewhere between the blue and the green. So I'm reasonably optimistic for a really good month of July and August, and we basically should do about 5.5 million flights in the European network this year, which is approximately half of what we did in 2019. So here's hoping for a good summer. You know, if you look at the effect, today's an airports day, and just look at what's happening with the airports. We are seeing growth. We're seeing the return of holiday airports like Palma de Mallorca. We're also seeing Athens come back into the picture. And over the next few weeks, I expect to see this increase again. But it should be good news for airports as passengers start coming back. And of course, everybody's worrying about queues and all of these kind of things. But I'm sure that we'll get over this just to get out and get going. This is really important. You know, today is ACI Day, and it's a pleasure to have Luis Felipe with us. But just look at what they're predicting. Airports are in a meltdown worldwide. Global losses of 112 billion, passenger losses of 6 billion. And then we have a very uneven landscape. Airlines all over Europe are getting state aid. We see this in the large groups in Europe. And then the airports are getting very little. And of course, the thing that worries us most in Eurocontrol is the small regional connectivity, the outlying peripheral parts of Europe, and how that they can stay connected. And this is a big challenge for the financial viability of airports in the world ahead. So who knows what 2021 come and the future holds for airports, it really depends on how the industry recovers and what the structure is over the next number of years. It's interesting to look at what the priorities ACI World have. You know, the health measures, they're very, very committed to sustainability. And here, one of the big topics that we have in Europe is, of course, the airport slots. This debate will continue. You know, various airline groups don't see it in the same way. Airports don't see it in the same way as airlines. And the debate in Europe will continue. But the digital transformation is going to be really, really important. And of course, let's remember that for the last year, our industry has survived on air cargo. If we didn't have cargo, the financing wouldn't have been in the system. So hopefully you enjoy today. And I think it's really important that we get down to looking at what the key issues are for airport worldwide. If I can just mention to you that John Slattery, the Chief Executive of General Electric Aviation, will turn up here on the 24th of June. And I'm really looking forward to all the explanation of how John can sell GE90 engines with £115,000 of trust. And I'm really looking forward to a successful interview with him. But today, it's all about airports. Over to you, Luis, Felipe and Andrew. Thank you.
These times test us as a people. We must continue to think outside of the box to find new and innovative solutions.
Last year, the airport lost around $112 billion, 65% of our passengers. That is around 6 billion passengers globally.
We as an airport around the world, we didn't receive a lot of support from the governments.
We see a lot of bailouts and support for the airlines, but unfortunately we are not seeing that for the airports in the private sector.
The Airport Health Accreditation Program continues to meet the needs of our members.
Use the tests and vaccines to reopen the borders and reopen the countries.
The next step will be, of course, how we cope with net zero emissions by 2050. Technology, AI, biometrics, touchless process, and others in the future will play a key role.
My message is keep moving forward. The distance toward the finish line will depend on our ability to stay focused and disciplined. We have every reason to have confidence that we will win this battle.
Felipe, welcome to Straight Talk. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me here, Andrew.
Always a pleasure. Felipe, perhaps before we start, and obviously Eamonn's presentation made clear there's a lot of things for us to talk about. Perhaps before we start, though, I could ask you to, I introduced you as the DG of ACI World, but ACI has also got a number of regional offices, haven't they? What's the relationship between the regions and the centre?
Well, we are lucky to have an organization like ACI that is a confederated organization. That's why we have independent organizations in the regions, and that of course support and help the regional issues and the regional matters of our industry. We have 5 different regions around the world. We have ACI Latin America and Caribbean, ACI North America, ACI Europe, ACI Africa, and ACI Asia Pacific and Middle East, and of course ACI World. We basically focus on the global matters of the aviation industry, the relationship with ICAO and the international organizations, and the independent ACI regional offices deal with the regional issues. And in Europe, for example, we have the great job doing by Oliveira and his team supporting the development of the aviation industry and the airport industry in Europe.
So how is the airport industry surviving globally? Is it different in each region?
Yes, we have different regions, different approach, different ways of ownership of the airports, and that makes the global industry very diverse. We are coming from 10 years of good growth for the whole industry. Basically, until 2009, we are beating records and records of growth in terms of the passengers. And our biggest issue at that time was basically how we will cope with the capacity of the airports in the future. 2020 comes, and there's a big surprise with the COVID, and basically everything's changed. You know, we, as mentioned before, we have around $112 billion as losses in revenue, around 64% reduction in terms of the passengers, and this year won't be different at all. We are expecting to have $96 billion in terms of reduced revenues, because basically our main source of revenue comes from the passengers. And if you don't have the passengers circulating in our airports, we don't have the revenues to cope with the investments and to maintain the infrastructure that we have. Different regions are coping with the different ways of the recovery. We see domestic markets growing and coming back to the levels of 2019, sometimes even better. But we see, especially the international traffic, suffering a lot and affecting a lot our airports around the world, and of course, our communities that we serve.
So where are the domestic markets doing so well?
Because basically there is the developers of the vaccines. If you see in US, we have the developers of vaccines that is helping a lot to restart the industry. People are willing to travel. Everybody's crazy to take the next flight for a holiday destination, to reunite the families, to do business as well. That's why we have the intention for the people to fly, and we see that in the many surveys that comes from the market as well. However, you know, when you have one regulator that basically takes the decisions as a country basis, helps as well in terms of to reopen the markets and allow the people to travel. That's why we see the domestic markets, even in locations, are heavily affected by the COVID, like Brazil, India, and others, that is still with the good numbers in terms of the recovery, in terms of the domestic markets, and also good perspectives for the future as well. We see markets like China that already recovered around 1%, Russia that recovered around 1%. That's why we see a lot of movement, especially in domestic markets that are, of course, based on the people willing to travel. And of course, they don't need to be afraid to get quarantined in a different place and to get, of course, stuck in a different country without able to come back to their own country. There is some difference as well. Here in Canada, for example, we have the market, even the domestic market is standstill because of the decisions from the provinces that doesn't allow the flights between the two different provinces. That's why we have domestic markets that are doing well, but we have domestic markets that are not doing well. And one good example is Canada.
And it seems as if the common theme there is, have you got a single regulator or provincial regulators, perhaps? We heard Eamonn say that the thing that kept aviation going last year was cargo, but then you said that the trouble is cargo doesn't go duty-free shopping. Well, you didn't say that, but that's what you meant, I think. Cargo doesn't need an extra meal or you know, perfume, although some of the cargo I've met could do with some, I suspect. So do you think, therefore, that the industry is recovering at different speeds, the airlines doing better than the airports, doing better than the ANSPs, or maybe the other way around?
You know, the airports are essential facilities, and during the whole pandemic, the airports were open and operating. And different airlines, we cannot bring the building back to the concessionaire, to the concession, or we cannot bring even an elevator back to the producer of the manufacturer of the elevator, for example. That's why we need to keep our facilities working in the safest way, we need to keep the runway safe, we need to keep the operational safe. And that, of course, came with a cost. And in that way, we are keeping the airports opening to receive the cargo flights during the pandemic. We are keeping the airports open to receive the repatriation flights, to receive medicines, to receive medical equipments. And lately, we are receiving, of course, the vaccines as well. So as an essential facilities, we are doing everything we can to support the industry. But that came with a price. 2/3 of the airports around the world were in deficit before the pandemic. And now we have 100% of the airports in deficit. And because, of course, of the less movements of passengers. Basically, our main source of income is passengers, even if you consider the aeronautical revenues and non-aeronautical revenues. And that affect as well our way that how we can generate income and how we can keep the airports working safely. And the way that we are doing that is getting finance from the markets. And that, of course, come as well with a cost.
Well, indeed it does. And I think there are two issues I'd like to talk about there. One is that you as an essential facility are needing to keep your airports open for cargo and medical supplies and so forth. But yet it's the airlines that seem to have been able to get money from the state, from their governments, whereas you've had to go on market. Does that seem fair to you?
To be honest, we are very supportive that the airlines receive the support from the government. At the end, we are in the same aviation ecosystem, and you need to have this money that are injected in the industry to continue to operate. However, we see airlines receiving till March around $225 billion in state aid in different parts of the world, and the airports barely receive around $25–30 billion, driven basically by the US market. The difference is we are not only airlines and airport in aviation ecosystem. We have a lot of small and medium business that are also not receiving any kind of support rather than certain countries that support in wage subsidies. And that's affect the whole aviation ecosystem. 60% of the jobs of the aviation are in the airports. And a lot of big, small and medium companies went to the bunker of this period of time. We have thousands of layoffs that affect the local economies and affect the way that these economies around the airports can exist, and then how they can, of course, bring the possibility to generate revenue, income, and employees on the whole system. That's why we believe that of course, airlines receive a lot of money. We are okay with that. However, the governments need to look at the whole aviation ecosystem, not only the airline side. And that need to be fair.
To say that you're happy with the airlines getting so much money. But why? I mean, all those employment points that you make, all those benefits to the economy point that you make are no more or less valid than they are for the airlines. Is it just that Willie Walsh is a better lobbyist?
That is a great point. I don't believe on that. I think the airlines did a good job in terms of the points that they have, and we are happy because basically the relationship between the airlines and airports are very important. There is no airline without an airport, but there is no non-airport without an airline, and we don't exist if you don't have the passengers. And that's why we need to see the whole aviation ecosystem. That's why if the airlines are doing well, it's good for us. But now is the time that we can work together to rebuild the aviation ecosystem together and not blame each other if someone receives more or less, if the charges are increasing or not, if the slots are really well allocated or not. That's why there is a lot of things that comes together with these discussions and this approach that the governments have during the whole pandemic, and now in the recovery process also will play a key role. That's why we need to see now that it's not only the airlines that need the support, we need to have the support for the whole aviation ecosystem, and the whole aviation ecosystem also is supported by the costs that you need to incur, and also the way that you can keep the ground handlers working, the way that you can keep the duty-frees open, and also generate jobs and generate income for the communities that we serve.
But one of the things you said there, all the things you said there were very interesting, but specifically, if you're not getting financial assistance in the form of state aid the way the airlines are, you're going to need to increase your charges, aren't you, to cover your financing costs and all your other costs. Now, my feeling that is that the airlines are going to want increased charges like they want like they want a hole in the head. I mean, the airlines are going to squeal if you try to increase your charges, and yet if you don't increase your charges, you can't provide the services. How do we square that circle?
Yeah. That is an interesting topic because charges is always an issue that are focused on the airlines way to deal with the airports. But if you see the whole, and I would like to clarify as well, if you see the whole cost for an airline, the airport charges reduced from 7% to 6% from 2000, the operational cost of an airline from 2015 to 2019. And that is an interesting number because you see a reduction, and that includes as well the ATC charges. If you see, basically, the airport charges is only 4% of the total operational cost for an airline. And we still have the fuel playing a big role. That is the main cost for the industry. We have the second, the salaries and benefits paid by to the employees. And the third, we have aircraft ownership and aircraft leasing in maintenance as well. That are the big tickets for the airlines in terms of the cost. That's why focus on this small part of the cost if you have other areas that you can deal with that. And basically, consider my 25 years of aviation, I always, I was questioned because sometimes I'm changing the side. If you see from my career, I started in a global fuel company, moved to IATA. From IATA, I moved to another global fuel company. And after that, I moved to ALTA, the Latin American Airline Association, and I moved now to ACI. And I feel that I always working in the same industry because we need to find the ways that how we can work together, how we can find the ways that you can reduce the costs together. And during my few times, especially in IATA, the focus was work together with the fuel companies to reduce the taxation because the taxation affects the oil companies, and at the end, it's translated to the cost for the airline industry. If you are able to work together, we find a ways that you can reduce, for example, the taxation, and we have the cost reductions. And in terms of the fuel, we have billions of cost reductions considering that we work together with oil companies. Why not work together with the airports as well to find a ways that now in these difficult times, we have these adjustments because during the good times, we have the reductions. And in addition, how we cannot even think about change a little bit the concept, the light-handed approach that is doing by the Australia, for example, is a good example of how we can improve the system, how we can have the market-based approach. And that is something we need to rethink about charges, and we need to see how we can improve this relationship that could be much more proactive rather than a way that is a point of constraint between the airports and airlines.
I can hear, even from here, my environmentalist friends screaming at you that that aviation fuel is one of the least taxed items in the entire world. And I'd happily discuss that with you. But it's certainly true that your career you've been on the side of the oil industry, you've been on the side of the airlines, and now you're on the side of the airports. It's been an interesting move. I mean, you must have a poacher uniform and a gamekeeper uniform that you keep in your cupboard. Speaking of the ultimate poacher-gamekeeper interface, though, let's talk about slots for a minute because nothing's more fun than talking about slots. What's your view on the way the airlines are? Already, we've seen in Europe this week, the airlines have demanded a further extension to the freeze on the slot rules. Do you think the slot rules are fair as currently written?
To be honest, we had last year the first time when you have a good approach that we have the World Airport Slots Board together with the airlines, together with the airports, globally speaking, try to talk a little bit about a global perspective on slots, and that was great. I think it was the first time that we came out with a document that was signed. It's the first time the airports were considered on these discussions and we are great that we have this discussion with IATA and with the coordinators as well. The current situation helps because we need to have a recovery. We are in the very inconsistent path in terms of the opening the markets, and these agreements, these adjustments that we are having together with the Airport Awards Slots Board, with IATA and with ACI, have reflected in that we are supporting this market that is different, that is not working as expected since we signed our first agreement last year. However, what we need to think is that the airlines are reducing their fleets. And reducing their fleets, they won't use the slots as we expected. That's why something that we need to think about is that we need to think about the passenger at the end. There is some new airlines. We see, for example, in the US, the launching of the Breeze. Breeze is the new airline, the investment from David Newman. And this new airline we started to fly a couple of weeks ago, and we see new airlines coming in different parts of the world. That's why we see big airlines consolidation, reducing the fleets, and we see new airlines. We need to have the opportunity to have these new airlines getting into the system. And getting into the system will be when we have the possibility to have slots released by the airlines that won't use these slots, and basically will be able to pass these slots for new airlines that are coming. At the end, we need to think about the competition. We need to think about the passenger at the end. How you can continue to keep the passengers flying in the safest way, and of course, in the cheapest way as possible. The second is regarding infrastructure. You know, we have a huge investment in infrastructure, and we need to use as much as we can these slots. So we cannot have the infrastructure done, the infrastructure ready, and not receiving that airlines or that aircraft with the passengers that will help us to recover from the pandemic and from the crisis that we are. That's why basically these 2 points are very important. In the future, we need to rethink about that as well. We need to find a ways that the slots can be allocated in the right manner. They'll be allocated in the way that airlines and airports benefit from that, bringing the benefits from at the end for the passengers.
So the point, sorry to have tried to interrupt there. The point I was trying to make though was that you said we need a competitive market, but yet if it's only the airlines that control the allocations of slots, which is the current system, is that competitive in your eyes?
That is the case. We need to be together on that. We need to work together on that. Not only thinking the side of the airline side, but thinking the side of the airport side, and at the end, thinking the side of the passenger side. You know, that's why we need to have this continuity of these talks. We need to have continuities of these talks globally, respecting the different the written realities of the markets. As we see now, we have the US booming in terms of the domestic market. We have Europe starting to recover, but as Eamonn mentioned, we don't expect to have more than 50% of the operations by the summer. That's why we need to adjust and we need to work according with the markets, according to what's going on in different parts of the world. But in terms of the future, I think we need to continue these discussions through the World Airport Slots Board, through the coordinators with IATA and with ACI to have a more clear view about how we can deal with that in the future. One of the topics is the ownership of slots. As you know, many airlines are using slots to cover the debts or to get financing from the slots. The ownership is something that we need to really rediscuss about that. You know, if we are the owners of the infrastructure, the rights to use the slot cannot be transformed or cannot be moved in an ownership as well. That's why there is a lot of things to discuss. That this is a topic that you can spend days in talking about and how we can improve and how we can make the difference.
I'm glad that ACI is certainly prepared to do some of that work, though. I think that's a very good thing. You talked about the ownership of slots. What about the ownership of airports? We've also seen a big clash. I think it's fair to say there's been a fight between ACI and IATA over what sort of ownership structure is the best structure for airports. Do you have a view on ownership, and do you think that airports do compete with each other, or are airports simply monopolies?
Well, 2/3 of our airports are government-owned in certain ways, or public-private partnerships, and we have a third of our airports that are owned by private investors in different ways as well. In both cases, we operate well, rather if it's a government-owned or if we have a private investor. That's why basically it's not the ownership model that affects the relationship with airlines and with airports. We have regulated markets, as I mentioned, that during the good times provide good reduction of the charges for the airlines. And nowadays we have, of course, an expecting increase on the charges because we have a reduced traffic to cover our costs. The basic issue in terms of the ownership is, especially with the governments, that doesn't have good financial structure to finance the development of the airport industry. When these resources for the airports compete with the hospitals, schools, roads, that's why the countries doesn't have the possibility to reinvest in the aviation industry and of course recover through the tourism, through the business that generated by the airport industry or the airline industry through their systems. That's why in these parts of the world, we really recommend that these governments focus in the find a ways that they can have a kind of private-public partnerships or even concessions. However, we need to be careful about that as well. Some of the concessions around the world charge more than 50% of the income of the airport. And that, of course, turns the operations very expensive. And in certain ways, this money that is recovered are not reinvested in the aviation sector. That's why we see costs growing in different parts of the world. In one airport in the world, we have 72% of the gross income of the airport going directly to the government. That is not feasible in the current situation that you want to recover the industry. And that is a good way to start to work together with IATA, together with our airline partners, to deal with that, because that is the way that you can reduce the total cost of the industry and of course help to bring back the passengers and help to reduce the cost for the airlines and for the airports at the end.
Right. So how do you see the recovery taking place, I guess specifically in Europe? Do you think there will be fewer airlines? You've already said they'll have smaller fleets. And Eamonn mentioned the regional airports. How do you see the recovery coming back?
Well, airlines, as we all know, are continuing the process to consolidate. You know, especially in Europe, we have a lot of consolidation on the airline side. We are seeing the announcements of reducing of the fleets, and that is crucial because these fleets, of course, will have less aircrafts flying and less passengers flying to our airports as well. And that will impact not only the hub airports, but we impact the small and regional airports as well. That's why the way that we see that these new airlines maybe cover certain kind of the space generated by the airports, by the airlines that are leaving certain locations, will play a key role on the recovery process as well. That's why we see that the connectivity provided by the airports, if you think about Europe or any other part of the world, are the key element to continue the growth of aviation. Aviation is everything about connectivity. If you would like to go to do a business in a certain place, you won't like to travel by air to a certain place and take a car or a train or something like that for 3, 4, 5 hours to the final destination. If you like to take a holiday, it's the same. That's why basically the business people and the holiday travelers as well are looking to go straight to the location they are looking to do business. And that is the beauty of the airports. The airports generate, as I mentioned, 60% of the jobs of the whole industry because they generate an ecosystem around the airport that generate different kind of jobs and generate a lot of development, not only on the airport side, but also helping the tourist industry and the business industry as well. That's why the airports will take a little bit longer maybe to recover, but they are key elements to sustain the economies and to help to grow the economies of the cities and the locations that we serve.
But do you think we have too many airports?
To be honest, no. Again, the connectivity is very important. It's nice to see the people traveling direct to the points. And the airports have a different rule. You have the hub airports that compete between them. We have the airlines that compete between them in the hubs. And we have the point-to-point airlines as well that flies directly to the locations to bring passengers on business or passengers on holidays in different times of the year. That's why there is not too much airports. I think infrastructure is crucial to develop the world, to develop and help to go out of this crisis. And if we see that the airports are catalyze the development, socio-economic development of the communities we serve, it's good to have more airports. And it's good to have this competition among the airports to attract more business, to attract more airlines, and at the end to attract more people.
So moving on then perhaps to the issue of sustainability, although perhaps it is actually the same issue. The airports have done a really good job of insisting on carbon neutrality by 2050, or indeed in many airports' cases 2035. Is there much cost involved for an airport to become carbon neutral?
We are very happy that next week we will announce a big milestone for us in terms of the global airport industry. As ACI World, we are preparing to launch a long-term and very good, interesting campaign regarding the neutrality of airports, and that is based on a study that was a global study considering the different regions and different parts of the world. The main source of generation of carbon emissions in the airport is the grid of the electricity. That's why the energy generated to use at the airports. That's why there is a key element that is the governments, how the governments can help us to have a right supply of the energy. And of course, there is plenty of other things that comes together. Use of the facilities in terms of use of the light, the use of the cars, the use of the electric cars, or use of the sustainable aviation fuel for the cars as well, and other things. That's why basically there is plenty of things that need to be done by the airports. And we have a clear path in how we can reach that for the future. Led by Europe and ACI Europe, we have a very good examples. Sweden last year, even in the year of the crisis, they reached carbon neutrality, the net zero carbon emissions by 2020. And more than 90 airports in Europe also are looking to have carbon neutrality till 2030. And that is improving a lot. That's why we are working very hard how we can reach this carbon neutrality. In terms of the global investment in airports, we have a lot of investments in greenfield airports, especially in Asia Pacific. And usually the cost to construct a green infrastructure is around 8% higher than construct a normal airport. That's why all the facilities that you construct, if you turn that green, will cost around 80% more. And the brown,
we're back to charges, aren't we? Who's going to pay for that?
Yeah, that is the case. At the end, if we don't have the support on the green projects from the airports, that's why the green finance, let's say, at the end, the users will need to pay for that investment. And if you think about the brownfield airports, is even more difficult because they need to have around 14% higher costs to rebuild their airports, to improve their facilities, to get these airports in a neutrality. The total investment we expect in the next 20 years in terms of the greenfield and brownfield airports are $1.7 billion. And that is already include this 80% more for greenfield and 40% more for brownfield airports. And to finance there, of course, probably goes through the users.
Right. Well, indeed, and they'll very much enjoy that, I'm sure. But when you said that the main source of emissions at an airport is the power to drive the terminal, aren't you forgetting that rather big elephant at the end of the runway? Do you have any say or any way you can influence the industry's emissions?
I think we see some governments that are doing very well in terms of how they are supporting. We are very against, as the same as the airlines, that taxes doesn't help because they only increase the cost, and usually these taxes are not used for the replacement or use it to really turn the industry green. That's why what we really believe is the governments need to work together with the industry to support this change, to finance this change, and the benefit will be for all of us, because we can continue to bring our license to fly. That's why our right to fly, to operate, because the environment and sustainability is a key element for the future. However, we will continue to provide the socio-economic benefits that we provide as an industry. That's why this work that we can work together, airlines, airports, and governments, will help us to develop a green future for all of us. There is a lot of investments in sustainable aviation fuels, hydrogen, and airports also need to be ready for these new sources of energy, including electricity. And that is something we need to work together with the airlines as well.
Well, indeed. The other thing that I think you have to work together on, I assume, is that whole new old area of health and health certification and so forth. I think one of the things the pandemic might have taught us is that we're going back to the good old days of having quarantines and all those sorts of health checks. Does that have does that change the way airports are going to have to be designed?
To be honest, the biggest issue today is how the governments can concentrate their efforts to harmonize the system. Basically, the airports cannot support the same level of traffic of 2019 with the current rules. That's why we need to work very hard to harmonize the system, and harmonizing the system will be a way to continue to grow, and will be a way to have the seamless passenger use of the terminal in the fastest way. That's why we will need to see more biometrics implemented by immigrations. We need to see more the health certificates use it, accepting vaccines and tests from different countries. We need to have CT technologies as well, use it on the screening, the bags, the hand baggage of the passengers. We need to have the crowd controls and many other things. That's why the technology will play a key role to help the airports go back on track. But the basics of the hygiene and health will come to stay. That's why the clean of the airports using UV, the use of the alcohol gel and other things is some things that comes to stay. And maybe why not the use of the masks for a long time that you can consider also in a way that you can keep the passengers safe, at least until we have the whole world vaccinated. We have 2 billion of doses still now. We still have at least 10 billion more to be deployed to reach kind of certain herd immunity in the whole passenger in the whole world, let's say.
Indeed, indeed. We're just about out of time, so I'll ask you the question, Felipe, that I ask all of my guests, and that is, what more do you think EUROCONTROL can do to help facilitate global aviation as well as European aviation?
EUROCONTROL is doing a fantastic job to provide and support in a safe environment for the airlines to operate in Europe. I think EUROCONTROL could play a key role on the sustainability as well, supporting the development of the ATC system in terms of we can have more direct routes and we can have an opportunity to see airlines going straight to the airports rather than continuous passing to different air traffic controllers around the way. That's why EUROCONTROL can motivate these changes, and that, of course, will reduce the carbon emissions, will help us in terms of sustainability, will help us to recover the industry in terms of the cost, and in addition, of course, will bring a very good example to be implemented around the world. Because it's not an European problem, it's a problem that we have in different places of the world. Let's say the ownership of airspace is something that is worrying us in terms of the sovereignty of the airspace, also block certain kind of developments that we must have in our industry.
Well, thank you very much, Felipe. I really enjoyed talking to you, and it's always fascinating to see the airport's perspective because much of the debate is, of course, driven by the airlines. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you agreed with me that that really was interesting and very insightful. I'd like to thank Felipe one more time for giving us his expertise and his wisdom. I'm very grateful for that. As Eamonn mentioned, our next Straight Talk is on the 24th of June. It is Mr. John Slattery, the DG of, the CEO of GE Engines. Almost impossible to talk about aviation at the moment and not talk about engines and the new technologies. So with that, I'd like to ask you one more time to join me in thanking Felipe and to wish you all a very good day.